At 29, Olivia Bennett had become the go-to travel advisor at Aurora Journeys, a boutique agency nestled in downtown Seattle. Her days were filled with curating lavish getaways, private overwater villas in Bora Bora, gourmet wine tours through Tuscany, and once-in-a-lifetime safaris across the Serengeti. She could vividly describe the silk thread count of Parisian hotel linens or the aroma of freshly baked croissants wafting through a Roman piazza. Yet her own vacations rarely extended beyond a weekend at her aunt's cabin in the Cascades. Despite this, Olivia found joy in orchestrating dream vacations for others. Her desk was adorned with postcards from grateful clients, each one a testament to the adventures she helped bring to life. Her manager often remarked, "Olivia, you craft dreams you've yet to live." While colleagues chased commissions, Olivia built relationships. She listened intently, remembered the little details, and poured her heart into every itinerary. Clients trusted her implicitly, often returning with tales of unforgettable experiences. Though she longed to explore the world herself, Olivia's greatest satisfaction came from knowing she played a part in someone else's cherished memories. In her mind, that was a journey worth taking. Olivia Bennett could barely contain her excitement as she stared at the sleek envelope in her hands. Inside was a first-class ticket, Seattle to Sydney, Seat 2A. The agency's entire team had pitched in, pooling airline miles and staff discounts. They said it was a thank you gift. "You've made magic for others for years," her manager Carmen had said. "Now it's your turn." The timing was perfect. Her younger brother Mason was getting married in Australia, and Olivia hadn't seen him in nearly 4 years. She'd planned to fly coach, pinch every penny, and squeeze her suitcase under her seat like always. But now, a lie-flat seat, gourmet meals, champagne in real glass, a rare taste of luxury she'd only booked for others. She read every review of the airline's first-class experience, watched hours of videos on the cabin layout, and even memorized how to adjust the seat to fully flat mode. It wasn't just a flight, it was a dream she'd never dared to think was for her. The morning of the flight, Olivia arrived at the airport 3 hours early. She wore a deep blue linen blazer over a cream blouse, hoping she looked first-class enough to belong. Her suitcase rolled silently beside her as she walked with growing anticipation toward the international gate. That's when she noticed him. A man sat alone near the window, clutching a boarding pass with unsteady hands. The right side of his face was scarred, the skin puckered and stretched from what looked like deep burns. His hands, equally damaged, trembled slightly as he tried to zip a worn leather bag. Passengers kept their distance. A child stared. A woman turned her son away. Olivia caught the flicker of pain in the man's eyes, the way he shrank further into himself, as if trying to disappear. She knew that look. Her father, after his car accident, wore the same expression every time people averted their eyes or stared too long. Dignity buried beneath decades of silence. The invisible man face, he used to call it. A defense mechanism for people the world pretended not to see. The boarding call echoed through the terminal. "First-class passengers for Flight 816 to Sydney may now board." Olivia's heart leapt. This was her moment, the one she'd imagined over and over. As she reached for her bag, the man's toiletry kit slipped from his lap, spilling items across the floor. A toothbrush, a small shaving cream tube, a sealed envelope. No one moved to help. No one, except Olivia. She knelt down beside him, gently gathering his things. "Here," she said softly, handing him the items one by one. When she picked up his boarding pass, her eyes caught the seat assignment. 38D. Last row, middle seat. 14 hours. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "It's nothing," she replied, but the pit in her stomach disagreed. As she walked toward the gate, the thought of him trapped in that cramped seat haunted her. His injuries would make it unbearable. The constant brushing against strangers, the narrow space, the looks. Her fingers gripped the edge of her 2A ticket. It wasn't fair. She hesitated just steps from the gate. This was her chance, her one shot. She'd imagined every detail. She'd earned it. Her co-workers had sacrificed for it. She owed it to them, to herself. Then her mind flashed to her father again. The times when strangers offered him their seat. the glimmers of kindness that made hard days a little softer. Before she could change her mind, Olivia turned on her heel and walked back to the man. "Sir," she said, her voice steady but trembling, "would you, would you like to switch seats with me? I'm in 2A. He blinked as if he'd misheard. "I couldn't," he said quickly. "That's not—" "You can," Olivia insisted. "You should." His eyes welled up, not with tears exactly, but something far heavier, recognition, as if someone had finally looked past the scars and seen the man beneath. "Are you certain?" She smiled, holding out her boarding pass. "Absolutely." The gate agent looked stunned. "You want to give up 2As? Yes, he's taking my seat." And just like that, she handed over the dream she'd never thought she'd live. The man, still nameless to her, walked toward the gate, casting a backward glance filled with something Olivia would never forget. Not gratitude, not pity, just peace. Olivia boarded with the last group, cramped between a teenager with headphones and a man who hogged the armrest. Her knees bumped the seat in front. Her carefully pressed blazer wrinkled in minutes. Her in-flight meal was forgettable. She barely slept. But as the plane leveled off, she peeked down the aisle. The man in 2A sipped champagne. A real glass. A real smile. He looked more human now. More at ease. Like he belonged. And suddenly, Olivia felt something no luxury suite could ever buy. She felt right. The plane landed in Sydney just past sunset, the sky painted in golden streaks over the tarmac. Olivia Bennett, exhausted from 14 hours squeezed between strangers, stepped off the aircraft with stiff limbs and wrinkled clothes. Her curls were flat, her blazer wilted, and her makeup nearly gone. This wasn't the graceful arrival she'd dreamed of, but her heart was light. Her brother Mason was waiting just past customs, waving like a lunatic with a handmade sign that read, "Welcome home, Liv." She laughed through a yawn and ran into his arms. "You look like you got dragged here in the luggage compartment," he teased. "I kind of did," Olivia smirked. "Long story." They didn't talk about the seat. Not yet. It wasn't the right time. Mason was buzzing with wedding details, and Olivia let herself get swept up in his happiness. For a few days, she was just the sister of the groom, helping set up the reception, wrangling vendors, trying on dresses with Mason's fiancée Bree. She never once brought up the flight. The moment felt private, sacred somehow. But on the third night, as she unpacked her suitcase at the hotel, Olivia found something wedged inside her carry-on. A neatly folded airline napkin, tucked between her planner and headphones. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded it. The handwriting was steady but careful, as if each letter had been placed with purpose. "I won't forget your kindness. Thank you for seeing me. T.G." Olivia stared at the note, heart pounding. Her breath caught as she reread the words. T.G. The initials felt familiar, yet still distant, like a mystery she wasn't meant to solve just yet. The next morning, Olivia stood barefoot on the hotel balcony, watching the sunrise pour across Sydney Harbor. The city shimmered below her, but her mind was miles above, still somewhere in that airplane cabin. She could see the man's face, scarred but strong, reserved yet dignified. And she wondered again who he really was. She had no way to contact him, no full name, no email, just a napkin and a memory. When she returned home to Seattle the following week, Olivia tucked the napkin into a small glass frame and placed it on her desk at Aurora Journeys. Right next to the glossy postcards from her clients, it stood like a quiet monument to something far more meaningful than a tropical getaway. Life resumed. Sort of. Olivia smiled through meetings, booked honeymoons, crafted itineraries. But part of her kept drifting back to that flight, that man, that moment. And then, exactly 3 weeks after she returned, something impossible happened. It began with a sound. Whump, whump, whump. The low thumping rumbled through her windows just before 6 a.m., vibrating the floorboards and rattling the coffee mug on her nightstand. At first, she thought it was an earthquake. Then she heard it again, louder this time, rhythmic, mechanical, helicopter blades. Still half asleep, Olivia stumbled to her window and pulled back the curtain, and froze. There, hovering just above the field behind her home, was a massive white and green helicopter. On its side were the unmistakable words, United States of America. Her breath hitched. She recognized it instantly. It was Marine One. What the actual, Olivia whispered, stumbling backward, heart hammering. In her driveway, two black SUVs had appeared. Men in dark suits and earpieces stood watchfully, scanning the perimeter like something out of a political thriller. Neighbors gathered down the block, held back by local police, who were clearly just as confused. Then came the knock. 3 firm raps at the front door. Official, purposeful. Olivia scrambled to find clothes, still in a worn t-shirt and pajama pants, and flung open the door with wide eyes. A man in a black suit stood tall, flashing a badge. "Ms. Olivia Bennett?" he asked. She nodded, stunned. "I'm with the United States Secret Service. We apologize for the early arrival, but you have visitors who would like to speak with you. May I ask you to be ready in 15 minutes? "Visitors?" she repeated. "On that?" She pointed toward the descending helicopter. The agent smiled ever so slightly. "Yes, ma'am. If you'll get dressed, everything will be explained." 15 minutes later, Olivia, now dressed in jeans and a clean blouse, was escorted to the edge of her backyard, where the rotor wash of Marine One stirred up a gentle storm of leaves and dust. And then he appeared. A tall man stepped forward, wearing a decorated army dress uniform. The sun caught the silver trim on his medals, casting flashes of light across his chest. His face, though partly hidden beneath his cap, was unmistakable. Scarred, strong, familiar. "TG," Olivia whispered. He smiled. "Ms. Bennett," he said, extending a gloved hand. "We met on a flight to Sydney a few weeks ago. I never introduced myself properly. I'm Colonel Thomas Garrett, United States Army Special Forces." Her jaw dropped. She shook his hand, stunned into silence. "You were," she began, trying to process everything. "You're—" "Yes, ma'am," he said gently. "The man you helped. And now, I'm here to return that kindness." Olivia could barely breathe as she stood in the morning light, staring at the man in uniform before her. Colonel Thomas Garrett, the same man she'd given her first-class seat to 3 weeks ago. Only now he was no longer the quiet, burned stranger on a plane. He was a war hero standing at the edge of her backyard, flanked by Secret Service agents and framed by the hulking silhouette of Marine One. "Colonel Garrett?" she said again, as if trying to convince herself he was real. "Yes, ma'am." He nodded, his voice as composed as the metals glittering on his chest. "I didn't get to introduce myself properly on that flight. I hope you'll forgive the dramatic entrance. You, this can't be real," she stammered, still clutching the doorframe. Garrett offered a soft chuckle. "That's what I said when the First Lady told me we'd be flying Marine One out here." Her mouth fell open. "The First Lady?" Garrett nodded. "Let me explain." He gestured toward the patio table on her deck, and they sat, the distant rotor of the now idle helicopter thumping gently in the air like a heartbeat. Garrett removed his hat, revealing more of the scarring that ran from his temple down to his jaw, but Olivia barely noticed anymore. What she saw now was a man radiating calm, strength, and something else, gratitude. "3 years ago," he began, "I led a classified Special Forces operation overseas. We were deep behind enemy lines, outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a compound that had just been bombed. Fire was everywhere. One of our helicopters had been hit trying to extract us." He paused as if the memory still clawed at his lungs. "My team, 12 of them, were pinned under debris and trying to fight their way out. I was the last man inside. I managed to get them all out before the second blast." He turned his face slightly, pointing to the scarring. "But not before this happened." Olivia's breath caught. "I spent 7 months in recovery, multiple grafts, dozens of surgeries. At first, people couldn't look at me. Then they stopped trying at all." She swallowed hard, suddenly remembering how everyone at the terminal that day had avoided sitting near him. "When I boarded that flight to Sydney," he continued, "I was headed for a cutting-edge treatment facility. Australia's leading a new experimental burn recovery program." "And did it help?" she asked. He nodded. "It did. Physically, I've come a long way. But mentally—" His voice trailed off for a second. "That day, sitting alone at the gate, I felt invisible. Again. like I was something to be tolerated, not seen, until you came along. I just helped pick up your bag, Olivia said quietly. You did a lot more than that, Garrett replied. You saw me, and then you gave up a seat you'd waited your whole life to experience. She smiled faintly, remembering how cramped 38D had been. I returned to the States a few days after you, he said. That same week, I received the Medal of Honor at the White House. Her eyes widened. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, holding it gently. I told your story during the ceremony. What? Olivia gasped. In front of the president, the Joint Chiefs, and every major news outlet in the country, Garrett said. I said that the true heroes aren't always wearing uniforms. Sometimes they're in wrinkled blazers, kneeling on airport floors, offering simple kindness without expecting anything in return. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth. I didn't know your name then, he added, but the First Lady was deeply moved. She made it her mission to track you down. When she learned you were a travel advisor who had never experienced the destinations you booked, well, that's when this whole idea was born. He gestured toward the helicopter in her backyard. You're kidding, she whispered. The White House planned this? Garrett nodded. At her request, to thank you properly, and to remind people that compassion still matters. Olivia blinked hard to keep tears from falling. This is too much. I don't deserve this. You do, Garrett said, leaning forward. Not because you gave up a seat, but because you reminded me, and others, what it means to be human. He stood, motioning toward the SUV. There's more, if you're willing. She looked at him, eyes full of emotion. More? Garrett offered his hand. Consider it the start of your very own dream itinerary. The roar of the rotor blades whipped through Olivia's hair as she stepped toward the open bay of Marine One. Her sneakers sank slightly into the grass, and the smell of jet fuel hung in the morning air like adrenaline. Just moments ago, she was in her kitchen staring at half-finished emails and a lukewarm cup of coffee. Now she was boarding the president's helicopter. Colonel Garrett offered his hand to steady her as she climbed the steps. Watch your step, Ms. Bennett. Olivia glanced back once, her small, weathered home framed by picket fences and wide-eyed neighbors standing on tiptoe. Then the door sealed behind her with a quiet hiss, and the rest of the world disappeared. Inside, the cabin was sleek and pristine, unlike anything she'd ever seen. Leather seats, mahogany trim, gleaming brass fixtures, a far cry from the cramped economy rows she'd spent years squeezing into or booking for others. You all right? Garrett asked, settling into the seat across from her. She nodded slowly, eyes wide. I feel like I've been dropped into someone else's life. You have, he smiled. For the next few days, consider this your story. The helicopter lifted smoothly, and the ground below fell away. Olivia pressed her face to the window, watching her neighborhood shrink into a blur of rooftops and winding roads. For the first time, she wasn't helping someone else get to paradise. She was headed there herself. When they landed at Andrews Air Force Base, another surprise waited, a gleaming C-37A Gulfstream jet, its metallic skin catching the morning light like a mirror. Olivia blinked at it. That's not commercial? Garrett laughed. Definitely not. This is military transport, usually reserved for dignitaries, generals, and today, one very special travel advisor. She turned toward him. Where are we going? He smiled. Hawaii, Hail Koa, Waikiki Beach. Her heart nearly stopped. She'd booked that resort for a dozen clients over the years, always describing its pristine views, private military access, and guarded serenity. She'd never imagined she'd step foot there. On board the aircraft, everything felt surreal. Silk pillows, warm towels. A dedicated military steward greeted her by name. She wanted to ask if they had the wrong Olivia Bennett, but then Garrett leaned over and said softly, the First Lady herself requested this itinerary. She figured it was time someone gave you a dream trip for once. Tears pricked the corners of Olivia's eyes. She didn't know how to respond, so she whispered, thank you, though it didn't seem nearly enough. The flight to Hawaii was smooth, quiet, and filled with moments Olivia tried to bottle in her memory. Garrett told stories, not war stories, but human ones, About his childhood, about hiking in the Pacific Northwest, about the first book that ever made him cry. With each mile, the mysterious man she'd helped on that plane became a real person, a friend. When the jet touched down on Oahu, military personnel greeted them with crisp salutes and warm smiles. Olivia stepped into the tropical heat and blinked up at a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Her room at Halcoa wasn't just a suite, it was the suite. The one usually reserved for generals and visiting heads of state. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Waikiki Beach. A lei of fragrant plumeria awaited her on the pillow. There was even a framed note by the bed. Ms. Bennett, thank you for reminding us all that kindness is a luxury we can afford to give. Enjoy every second. The First Lady. Over the next few days, Olivia lived a life she'd only planned for others. She toured naval bases, boarded aircraft carriers, and sailed past the USS Arizona Memorial at Pearl Harbor aboard a private military vessel. Each tour guide treated her like she mattered, because somehow she did. During a helicopter tour of the island, the pilot handed her a headset and said, "Colonel Garrett told me to show you his favorite place." They soared over jungle-covered cliffs until a waterfall appeared, tumbling into a lagoon so untouched it looked like it belonged in a dream. He came here to reflect after his final surgery, the pilot said this view reminded him why he kept fighting. Olivia blinked back tears, clutching the headset tight. The cascade below was impossibly perfect. So was this moment. On the final evening, Garrett met her for dinner on a private stretch of beach, waves whispering against the shore. He wore a simple polo shirt and slacks. No medals, no titles. Just Thomas. "I've got one more trip coming up," he said as they watched the sun dip beneath the horizon. "Final round of treatment. I'm heading back to Sydney." She smiled. "You'll do great." He looked at her, eyes soft. "I've booked 2 first-class tickets this time. One has your name on it, if you'll come with me." "Me?" She blinked. "You're not military or family," he said, "but you were the first person to treat me like I still mattered. That counts more than rank." Olivia didn't respond right away. She just looked at the waves, at the stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky. Then she smiled. "I'd be honored." Olivia Bennett stood barefoot in the soft sand of Waikiki Beach, watching the last shimmer of sun disappear into the Pacific. Her dress fluttered in the evening breeze, salt in her hair, a cocktail untouched beside her. It had been 6 days of wonder, sunrises over Pearl Harbor, secret waterfalls, naval tours, and a sense of belonging she hadn't known she'd needed. But tonight felt different, deeper. Across from her, at the candlelit table, Colonel Thomas Garrett wasn't wearing his medals, just a soft navy polo and slacks. A man, not a hero. Someone who had learned to live with pain and scars, and now, somehow, with hope. "Are you sure about this?" Olivia asked quietly, her voice almost lost beneath the hush of the waves. Garrett looked up, his expression warm. "Olivia, I've never been more sure of anything. I'm going back to Sydney for my final round of treatment. I could have gone alone, but I don't want to, not this time." He reached into his pocket and slid a small boarding envelope across the table. "First class, seat 2B. "For you," he said. "The seat beside mine." Olivia stared at it for a moment. All she could think of was that day at the airport, 3 weeks ago, when she'd handed him 2A without hesitation. Now the seat next to it was being returned to her, not out of pity or obligation, but as a gesture of something stronger. Trust. "I'd be honored," she whispered. The morning they left Oahu, Olivia dressed differently, not to impress, but to be ready, to belong. As she stepped onto the tarmac beside Garrett, the crew of the Gulfstream greeted her like family. The captain even saluted her. Garrett smirked. "Told them you outranked me this time." She laughed, freely, easily. It was a laugh she hadn't known she'd been holding in for years. The flight to Sydney was smooth and warm, not just because of the luxurious seats or gourmet meals, but because this time, she wasn't living vicariously through someone else's itinerary. This time, she was building her own story. They talked more deeply than ever before, about loss, about what war takes, about what kindness gives back. Garrett opened up in ways that startled her, not just about the mission that left him scarred, but about the silence that followed, how people stopped looking him in the eye, how doors opened for medals but closed when the wounds were visible. Olivia didn't interrupt. She just listened. You know, he said somewhere over the Pacific, after the operation, I became functional, but not whole. I thought that was enough. Then I met you. You didn't give me space because I was broken. You gave me dignity like I was still human. And that did something no surgery could. She reached across the tray table and gently touched his hand. You were never broken. He didn't respond right away, just turned his palm upward and held hers in return. Sydney was both familiar and transformed. Olivia had been there before, for her brother's wedding, but now walking through the airport beside a decorated Special Forces officer who carried both wounds and grace, the city felt entirely new. Garrett's treatment went smoothly, with Olivia accompanying him to appointments, therapy, and recovery sessions. The medical staff welcomed her like a trusted companion, not a stranger. During quiet evenings, they walked along the harbor, sharing stories of their childhoods, their fears, their dreams. He told her about the first soldier he ever lost, and she told him about the postcards she kept from every client she'd ever booked, because it made her feel like she'd been to those places too. One evening, as they sat watching the opera house glow across the water, Garrett asked softly, have you ever thought of seeing the world for real, not just through your client's eyes? She looked at him, the wind catching her hair. I have, but it never felt possible, until now. He leaned back on the bench, thoughtful. You'd make one hell of a travel writer, or a guide, or whatever you wanted, really. I've seen the way people open up to you. You don't just plan trips, you change people. She smiled, a little overwhelmed. I never knew how much I needed this. Neither did I, he replied. When they returned to the U.S., Olivia felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. At her desk back at Aurora Journeys, clients immediately noticed something different. Her eyes sparkled more. Her voice carried warmth laced with lived experience. She hadn't just walked beaches. She'd walked beside someone who reminded her what courage looked like when no one was watching. She hadn't just taken a trip. She'd taken a step into her own story. On her first day back, she opened her drawer and placed something new beside the framed napkin, the boarding envelope from Seat 2B, a symbol not just of a journey, but of a moment when kindness came full circle. Weeks later, she received a letter, handwritten, from Garrett. You gave me back my name when I felt reduced to my scars. You reminded me I wasn't invisible. If you ever wonder what your act meant to me, just know, you didn't give up a seat. You gave me a reason to return to the world. I'll always owe you that. Below the letter was a note from the First Lady's office. We're launching a civilian recognition program for acts of compassion in public spaces. We'd like you to be the face of it, Ms. Bennett. Olivia smiled, tears threatening to spill. She had spent her career sending people toward paradise. Now finally it had found her. Olivia Bennett never imagined her quiet act of kindness would echo all the way to the White House, let alone change her path forever. But weeks after returning from Sydney, she stood before a podium in Washington, D.C., her voice steady despite the cameras flashing. Behind her, a new banner read, The Bennett Initiative, Honoring Everyday Compassion. It was a national campaign inspired by her story, championed by the First Lady and embraced by veterans organizations across the country. In her hand, Olivia held the framed napkin from that flight, the simple message that had started it all. I didn't give up a seat that day, she said softly. I made space for someone to feel seen. The audience, full of service members and civilians alike, rose in applause. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Colonel Garrett approached, now fully recovered, in civilian clothes. He took her hand in his, pride in his eyes. You helped me return to the world, he whispered. Now it's your turn. And in that moment, Olivia understood. This wasn't the end of a journey. It was the beginning of something far bigger. Her story, once quiet and ordinary, was now a beacon reminding others. Kindness doesn't cost a thing, but it can change everything. Life lesson: the power of one small act. Sometimes the most extraordinary changes begin with the quietest choices. Olivia Bennett didn't set out to change a life when she gave up her seat. She didn't know the man she helped was a decorated soldier. She didn't expect cameras, recognition, or to become the face of a national movement. All she did was see someone that the world had learned to overlook, and she chose kindness. That's the lesson. In a world obsessed with status, image, and reward, we forget the power of simple humanity. We underestimate the ripple effect of treating someone with dignity. But what Olivia reminds us is this: you never know what someone is carrying: a scar, a memory, a burden invisible to the world. And when you choose compassion, even when it costs you something, you remind others and yourself of what truly matters. Your small act may be the only moment of hope someone experiences that day, or that month, or ever. So don't wait to be important to make an impact. Be kind, be present, see people, because sometimes that one quiet moment of grace becomes the spark that lights up someone else's world. And in doing so, it may just change yours too.